approach, which is called a technology standard. The regulator could say, I know about a technology for cars that you guys aren't using yet. It's called catalytic converters. It reduces all these particulates and reduces the smoke coming out of the back of your car. I'm going to require you car companies to put this on your car. Sulfur dioxide power plants, we know about a technology where you take the gas coming out of the power plant and put it through a scrubber. And we're going to reduce the amount of sulfur dioxide coming out. Right now, with carbon, we're in a tricky space where we can say, we don't want any more carbon coming out of your coal electricity. Let's cap it. That's a lot of the way the Kyoto Protocol works is let's cap things at the 2000 level. So we don't have carbon sequestration, but we're going to say, we're going to figure out how to do carbon sequestration. I'm going to have a technology standard for how much carbon you can produce, and you're going to figure out some efficient way to do carbon sequestration. So we also have what's called an effluent standard. Effluent is the pollution coming out of a source. So we can only pollute a certain amount for each quantity produced. The way it's going right now for electricity at the EPA is you can only produce so many kilograms of CO2 for every megawatt hour of electricity that your plant produces. This is what the regulation is going to look like. What we already have extensively, especially in California, is grams of these 4 or 5 target pollutants of air pollution per mile driven by a car. So the regulators can set targets for how much pollution per unit of output. This here has an abbreviation in the book, TBES, Technology-Based Effluent Standard. The regulator studies technology, studies where technology is now, where technology could get to, and say, I know about a technology that will get us to a lower level of pollution for a given level of production. The regulator says, you're not using this right now because it costs too much. There is some input combination you could be using to produce at lower levels of pollution. The firm can decide how to adjust between input combinations and cost to get there. The regulator isn't saying you need to use less of this or more of this. The regulator says you need to get to this level of pollution per unit output. And you adjust your input mix to get there. So if this was the graph where we had pollution down here, and it was all other. Inputs were up here. And we're starting here. We want to get towards here. The regulator knows you can get to some point. This is going to cost a lot more to get up here. But the regulator says, I know of a possible technology you can get to. You just need to make sure that you're not polluting more than this amount per unit of pollution. And the firm can readjust and get to point A. So say this was like a price line. There's going to be a new price line here that's parallel. Their price and cost are going to be higher. But they know how to get to the point that's efficient for that firm. So where we have these in graphic detail in California, we have emission standards on vehicles. We have a set of pollutants that you're allowed to emit certain amounts of. The state groups all vehicles that are going to be sold into subgroups. An important addition to these is they used to just have them for a vehicle being sold. Now they want to see the technology that works over the life of the vehicle, because you could sell something that was efficient the day it left the lot, the day it left the assembly line, but quickly became polluting over time. But they want to make sure that it's going to be a clean car over the life of the vehicle. And then they want, importantly, to decrease emissions over time. They want the car companies constantly working to reduce the amount polluted every year. They can produce less. So there's these bins, low emission vehicles, ultra low emission vehicles. Look, I misspelled require there, but they have required car makers to sell a certain amount of cars into each bin of efficiency, of pollution reduction efficiency. Each category, they can sell 20% at this level of pollution, 20% at this level of pollution, 20% at this level of pollution, or they can't sell cars in California, or they have very high fines. So the car makers want to sell a lot of cars. This is a really complicated table, but let's just say these are cars. These are some light-duty trucks. These are some medium-duty trucks, right? One way to think about it from the car maker, if this is your SUV and this is your little car, one way to think about it, they said, if you want to sell SUVs, you have to sell a certain amount of very efficient little cars. Okay? That's the way they're motivating it from the markup point of the car companies, but that's a different issue than what we're at. What we have here are our target pollutants, okay? Carbon monoxide, nitrous oxide, particulates. I don't know what this one is, formaldehyde. So say we have 5 pollutants that the regulators are looking at. This is when I was saying this is the life of the car. So they even want to know at 100,000, after the car's driven 100,000 miles, how much is it polluting? These are these bins, I don't remember all these, low emission vehicle, ultra low emission vehicle. And this is the technology standard. This is the maximum amount that this car can pollute. Ultra low emission vehicle, 0.2 of NOx. And after 100,000 miles, it can only pollute 0.3 of NOx. So this is a whole bunch of rigorous technology-based effluent standard. And it's grams per mile driven. So the unit of output is miles driven. How much pollution will we get for miles driven? This is just looking overall at California. This is the number of cars sold. This is the total number of cars sold in California. Number of passenger cars and light-duty trucks won. So this is like small SUVs and passenger cars are now bin together. This would be like bigger trucks, and this would be even bigger trucks. So these need to be in certain percentages of how little pollution they're letting out. Finally, this is over time, right? So we're here. And the regulators are like, this is for passenger cars, how much pollution we're going to allow over time. This is time here, and this is reductions in pollution over time. This is so this is like the SUVs are the red squares. So as we see, previously there's been loopholes, and SUVs had much higher levels, but they're being harmonized with cars, and they're going to be driven down. So at here, this point out here in 2025, the SUVs and the cars are going to have to emit the same amount. One thing that I think is interesting, we have super strict regulations on particulate matter, and there's really cool cars in Europe that we can't have here that get much higher miles per gallon than we do, but that have slightly more particulate emissions. So just for example, there's a Mini Cooper that gets 60 miles per gallon. A Mini Cooper that's sold here is like 35 miles per gallon because it's diesel. they're trying to figure out how to bring these diesel cars here, but what's interesting thing to think about is, so the regulator in California has said, we care about smog, we care about child asthma, we care about cleaning up the smog in our cities. The Europeans are like, we care about a low carbon future, you know? So they're driving things towards efficiency. They're reducing smog and they're reducing particulates, but they don't have as bad of a smog problem as we have. So they're driving, you know, they're getting a lot less carbon per mile traveled than we are by driving things towards diesel. So at this point in the Eurodiesel, they have like, you know, 0.4 parts per million NOx. And this is like 0.2 parts per million NOx, right? And so we've decided that this reduction from 0.4 parts per million to 0.2 parts per million really matters to us in the future of managing smog in California. We still have it, we still have childhood asthma, it's still something that's pressing. And Europe's not saying we don't care about childhood asthma, but they're saying let's set the standard really aggressively for miles per gallon. What's the other difference about Europe? So the gas is like crazy more, right? Like 3 or 4 times more in some places, right? So the people buying cars want to buy the most efficient car possible. They also like small cars because their cities are really small. And if you tried to park an American car in like an Italian city, there'd be no way, right? So they have a lot of miniature cars. But it's just interesting that, you know, we're thinking about getting hybrids that get 50 miles per gallon, and we're like really excited about them, and there's whole sets of cars in Europe that are getting into the 60s that we can't have. So the regulator can get us up there. I already talked about this. The regulator knows about this point. The regulator's setting this technology standard knowing about point C. They said, this is how much pollution, you're polluting here, I'm going to reduce your amount of pollution. The producer's going to readjust to get to point A. So in the Salinas Valley lettuce, there's too much water applied. The producer does not, there's an externality. The producer doesn't have the cost of groundwater pollution as part of the production function. We can tax water to decrease its use, or we could set an effluent standard. So here is a new term that's introduced in the book, the ISO pollution curve. So this is groundwater runoff. That would be the same amount of pollution in kilograms of nitrogen per hectare that's running off. So this is based on some modeling, not on the production function, but this is the same amount of pollution would get us for the same amount of runoff. These input combinations would get us the same amount of runoff. What was weird for me when I first read the book, I was like, wow, they could put a lot more nitrogen on, but really the story here is decreasing their water use is more important than decreasing their nitrogen use, which is a little counterintuitive, but we'll go along with their assumptions. We could say there's a point. The regulator says you need to get to this lower level of pollution. So this is ISO pollution line that was 121, and now we want to get them to 116. We want to get them to here. First we did it. Oh no, first they were polluting here. We want to produce the water here. We want to go from A to H like this. So the price line for water is shifting out, and they're using less water and more nitrogen. So I have these numbers wrong. The original level of pollution was 121. We want to get them down to 116. So we could have a technology standard that allows them to readjust their, this is if we tax water, the amount that they pay for water is so much that they're paying a whole bunch of tax on water. But if we just try to put them on this lower pollution curve and they can readjust by themselves, then they can get to an efficient mix without paying all this tax. And they can increase their costs a little bit to get to this new cost line, but by readjusting, they'll still be able to produce without such higher costs. So the punchline here is, this is where we started. The producer would much rather have the technology standard. The costs are much lower. The producer doesn't like the tax, and the producer prefers the standard. The costs are lower. So we have this question about carbon emissions that I want to keep coming back to. President Obama had a chance to pass a law on carbon emissions in the first 2 years. He doubled down on healthcare. Carbon emissions got away from him. The Republicans took over. So is the president going to move forward, just gave a State of the Union, with some executive rulings? The president can do this through the EPA. The Supreme Court has said that the EPA can regulate carbon emissions as a pollutant. Carbon dioxide is another pollutant. The EPA regulates a whole bunch of different pollutants. They regulate nitrates and groundwater. So can the EPA reduce the amount of carbon dioxide that's being polluted? And they have proposed a regulation that's a technology-based effluent standard of how many pounds of carbon dioxide that can be emitted per megawatt hour electricity produced from coal. The problem is we have current production at 1,800 pounds per megawatt hour, and this is in the federal record proposed by EPA. They're going to have to figure out what it's going to take to get this through to be law, but this drastic reduction in carbon dioxide per unit of electricity. We don't have this technology for carbon sequestration yet. So there's 700 pounds of carbon dioxide that we need to take out if we want to produce additional electricity. Of course, the way environmental regulations work, this is a regulation on future power plants that will grandfather in all existing power plants, which we'll talk about later. But anyways, we don't have this technology yet. Carbon sequestration and storage. How can we take, a smokestack's coming up with sulfur dioxide, we can do some sort of chemical thing on it and take the sulfur dioxide out of the smokestack. We don't have a way to take carbon dioxide out of the smokestack and sort of lock it up. We need innovation. We need new technology. We need to figure this out. So potentially the EPA does this and says you can't build the next power plant until you figure out this new technology. Right? And so hopefully firms will spring up and be like, I'm going to figure out how to do this. So what they propose is pumping it deep underground. So if you could site your power plant next to like a salt mine or something where there's like an existing well where you could pump it deep underground. But that would change where the next power plant was going to be. So we're creating this market for like, where are we going to stick our carbon? What's the place that's going to receive our carbon? They would hire the geologists and the modelers, and that would be part of the innovation, right? Yeah. I mean, or let's not stick it underground. Let's say we'll bubble it through water and we'll grow algae and we'll make biodiesel from the algae, and the algae will eat the carbon dioxide and it'll be awesome. What's that? So billions of dollars are on the table. But we want the billions of dollars to be on the table. The planet's messed up. Like, let's bring the billions of dollars to the table to figure out this question. And we missed our chance to get Congress to act. They had a bill in Congress. It was pretty far along. The motivation fell apart. Congress was really good at stalling. So instead of Congress deciding we're going to regulate carbon, we're going to have an EPA emission standard like we have for other pollutants as our start on this. Are we out of time? We are out of time. Next time, we'll go into cost of production, look at Chapter 9. I will post a problem set tonight.